Let's be honest. The moment you start doubting if she even thinks about you, your mind goes into overdrive. You replay every interaction, dissect every word, and wonder if she even notices you at all. But here's the truth. Most men never hear. Women don't always show what they feel on the surface, and the signs that she's obsessively thinking about you are far subtler than you imagine. If you think she's indifferent, you might actually be standing at the very edge of her mind every day, every hour. She could be running scenarios, questions, and even doubts about you that you'll never see. Here's the thing about female psychology, it's not obvious. Women think in patterns and emotions intertwined, not in the linear, logical way men do. So when a woman is interested, when she's silently captivated, it doesn't always come with text messages or likes. It's in the little moments, the pause before she replies, the slight curiosity in her gaze, the way she remembers tiny, seemingly meaningless details about you. These are breadcrumbs, and if you know how to read them, you'll start to realize she's more involved in your world than you've allowed yourself to notice. Notice how often she circles back to conversations you thought were forgotten? That's not coincidence. That's her brain, looping through interactions, replaying them, analyzing them. She's wondering about your intentions, your desires, even the subtle energy you give off without realizing it. Every joke, every look, every word you casually dismiss becomes a mental puzzle she's trying to solve. She's running scenarios in her head, imagining possibilities where you could exist more prominently in her life. The women who think about someone nonstop aren't doing it for validation. They're doing it because something about you triggered a pattern in their mind that refuses to let go. And here's a brutal but liberating truth. You'll rarely hear it from her. Women are conditioned to hide these obsessive thoughts, to appear calm, composed, and even indifferent. The world tells her obsession is shameful or unseemly, so she buries it beneath a mask of casual disinterest. That's why men misread signals constantly. They're looking for fire in her eyes when she's actually keeping it smoldering quietly inside. What you perceive as distance could be the exact opposite of what you think it's, the silent gravity pulling her thoughts toward you, whether you realize it or not. It's easy to get caught in anxiety, to think that if she doesn't show interest directly, she must not care. But human minds, especially women's minds, operate on loops of emotional patterns. Attraction is as much about thought intensity as it is about action. If she's thinking about you nonstop, you'll see traces, not grand declarations, but microsigns. Curiosity in her questions, echoes of your presence in her social media activity, subtle references to things you've shared in casual conversation. Each is a thread that ties her mental energy to you, invisible yet undeniable. Now, ask yourself, have you noticed her remembering tiny details you barely thought mattered? That's the first hint she's thinking about you far more than she lets on. And this is only the beginning. The mind of a woman who has fixated on you is relentless. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You've probably caught yourself wondering why some women just can't stop appearing in your mind, even when you think you're moving on. The irony is, it's the same for her. When a woman is thinking about you non-stop, it's not about physical attraction alone, it's about curiosity, tension, and unresolved questions that her mind can't release. She's analyzing, imagining, and quietly replaying moments with you, over and over. Every detail matters: the way you laughed, the way you listened, even the silence between words. These fragments of your presence become a mental soundtrack she carries with her throughout the day. You might notice her asking questions that feel random or seemingly meaningless. She's fishing, not for information she actually needs, but to see how your mind works, how you react, and how much space you occupy in your emotional world. Every casual conversation, every shared joke becomes a test. And here's the subtle truth men almost never grasp. When a woman is obsessed with your thoughts, she doesn't want to overwhelm you. She wants to observe you, measure you, and understand if you're someone worth mentally looping over. Then there's the way she moves around you. You may notice fleeting gestures, small habits, a glance that lingers longer than it should, or sudden laughter at your jokes even when no one else reacts. These are not accidents. Her body, just like her mind, betrays the truth she's hiding. Every shift in energy, every small smile or frown is a ripple of her internal thought process. Women are wired to communicate emotionally first and verbally second. So when words are absent, pay attention to micro-actions. They reveal more than 1,000 texts ever could. Now, the dangerous part is your own interpretation. Men often misread interest as indifference and vice versa. You see the silence, the restraint, the hesitation, and you assume disinterest. But in reality, this is the hallmark of a woman deeply preoccupied with your presence. The more she holds herself back, the more she's likely thinking about you constantly. She may be imagining conversations she wants to have, moments she wants to create, or ways to interact with you without giving away the intensity of her thoughts. Even subtle social media behavior counts. Liking old posts, remembering small details you shared months ago, or popping up in conversations with mutual friends are all mental breadcrumbs. She's maintaining a connection in her mind, quietly checking patterns, replaying your words, and thinking about you far more than you realize. This mental loop isn't accidental, it's instinctive. Women process emotional significance differently than men, and when she fixates, her mind becomes a revolving door of thoughts about you, even in moments you believe she's entirely disengaged. Here's a reality you need to accept. Her obsession isn't always visible, and it's not always predictable. It's silent, relentless, and often hidden behind casual indifference. But once you start noticing the patterns, you'll see the invisible thread connecting her thoughts to your actions, your words, your very presence. Every small detail you dismiss could be amplified in her mind, looping like a movie scene she can't stop replaying. So ask yourself, has she ever brought up something months later, seemingly out of nowhere, that proves she was listening when you thought she wasn't? That's not coincidence. That's evidence of her mind circling back to you again and again without you even knowing. Most men completely miss the signs because they're looking for what they want to see instead of what's actually there. You're waiting for grand gestures, constant texts, or obvious flirting, but that's rarely how a woman's mind works when she's deeply thinking about you. Obsession isn't loud, it's quiet, persistent, and invisible to the untrained eye. She's thinking about you in ways you'll never notice unless you understand how her mind loops on emotion and curiosity simultaneously. Have you ever noticed how she sometimes seems distracted around you, almost lost in thought, then snaps back with a perfectly timed response? That split second isn't random. That's her mind circling back to you, analyzing your behavior, replaying scenarios, testing emotional reactions, and imagining outcomes. Women who think about someone constantly are running simulations in their heads. Your words, your tone, your energy, every small piece of your presence becomes a variable in her private mental experiment. And here's where it gets fascinating. She doesn't always realize the extent to which she's fixated. Her brain is wired to explore emotional significance, to create connections that aren't immediately visible. That casual, remember when, she drops, the story she repeats that involves you, or even the subtle references she makes to things she's learnt about you, they're all evidence of her mind obsessively circling back to you. She may deny it consciously, but her subconscious doesn't lie. Every detail you provide, every interaction you share, becomes fuel for a constant mental loop. You'll also notice patterns in how she manages attention. She may ask questions that seem innocent but are strategically probing. She might remember things you thought were forgotten or appear in spaces where she has no reason to be other than to maintain a subtle presence in your life. These behaviors aren't random. They're the markers of someone whose thoughts are heavily invested in you. The intensity doesn't always express itself outwardly. It often simmers under the surface, invisible unless you learn to notice the micro-signals. A lingering glance, a soft laugh at a joke she's already replayed in her mind 10 times. A slight hesitation before responding as she calculates the emotional impact of her words. And here's the harsh truth. Most men never notice these signs because they're impatient for direct validation. You expect explicit messages or immediate reactions, but her mind doesn't work that way. Her thoughts are recursive, spiraling around you silently, testing possibilities, imagining outcomes, and keeping your presence alive in her mental landscape long after you've left the room. This is why a woman can seem indifferent one moment and subtly engaged the next. The intensity is internal, invisible, and persistent. Now, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever caught her repeating details about you to someone else? Seemingly innocuous but deeply specific. That's not casual chatter. That's a reflection of the mental space she occupies with you. Every shared memory, every reference, every private reflection is a piece of evidence that your presence is etched into her mind. She might not admit it, she might not act on it openly, but she's thinking about you non-stop, and the signs are all around you, if you know how to see them. The most dangerous part of this isn't that she's thinking about you, it's that you're probably missing the evidence in plain sight. The women who obsess silently are masters of camouflage. Their thoughts run deep, yet their outward behavior often signals nothing is happening. But if you know where to look, the proof is undeniable. The way she times her interactions, the way she recalls details, the subtle shifts in energy, these are all breadcrumbs revealing a mind quietly consumed by you. Have you ever noticed how she reacts to your moods? Almost preemptively, she senses when something has affected you before you've even said a word. This isn't intuition alone, it's mental energy at work. She's replaying your past reactions, mapping patterns, and predicting outcomes. She's thinking about how you feel, what you want, and how she fits into that landscape. The intensity of her mental focus often surpasses any physical interaction. In her mind, you occupy space continuously, whether she's around you or not. Then there's the curiosity factor. When a woman is deeply thinking about you, her questions become precise, even surgical. She asks things that seem casual on the surface, but are carefully designed to uncover layers of your personality. She's listening for tone, inflection, hesitation signals most men don't even notice. She's dissecting, analyzing, and memorizing because your presence matters to her more than she's willing to admit. Every answer you give, every story you share, every laugh she hears from you is stored in her mental archive. And the longer she thinks about you, the more patterns she begins to notice, patterns she can't ignore. You'll also notice micro gestures that feel unconscious but are intentional in the mind. The way she tilts her head when talking to you, how her eyes catch yours and linger for just a second too long, or the subtle mirroring of your expressions, these are classic signs she's mentally in sync with you. Women often mirror those they think about deeply because it strengthens their emotional connection, even silently. These small behaviors are invisible to the inattentive man, but to the one who observes, they're screaming proof that her mind rarely leaves your presence. Here's the reality that most men never face. Her silence isn't indifference, and her restraint isn't lack of interest. It's strategy. She's keeping her emotions carefully contained while her mind works overtime, mapping scenarios, weighing possibilities, and replaying every encounter. And while you might be analyzing her words, she's analyzing your energy, your intent, your consistency. That's why sometimes she seems distant, and other times intensely engaged. The loop in her mind doesn't always translate directly into action. Finally, ask yourself, has she ever referenced something you said months ago? Something minor you didn't even remember? Did she bring it up casually, almost as an afterthought, yet perfectly relevant to the conversation? That's the ultimate sign. She's been thinking about you non-stop, storing every detail like a puzzle she can't stop solving. Every subtle word, glance, or gesture becomes part of a mental map where you're at the center. Recognize this, and suddenly the narrative changes. She isn't indifferent. She isn't distracted. She's preoccupied with you, quietly, persistently, and profoundly. The reality of what's happening in her mind is far more intense than most men realize. She's not just thinking about you casually. She's running an entire internal narrative where you are the central figure. Every interaction, every word, every nuance of your energy becomes a thread she can't let go of. And the more she suppresses her outward emotions, the more her mental focus sharpens. She's obsessed silently, and this obsession colors her emotions, actions, and even the smallest gestures she directs toward you. Have you noticed how some women seem almost absent one moment, then suddenly fully present the next? That's her mind pulling her back into focus on you, even when she's trying not to appear affected. She's constantly weighing outcomes, measuring her reactions, and imagining how different scenarios with you might play out. This is why a woman can be so calm, composed, and yet completely captivated. Her mind does the heavy lifting, while her exterior remains carefully neutral. She's thinking about you in ways you can't detect, and that mental presence is far more powerful than any visible signal. Then there's the emotional echoestony, almost imperceptible reactions that betray her thoughts. The quick intake of breath when you say something meaningful, the slight blush that appears even when she's trying to hide it, the sudden curiosity in her eyes when you talk about your life. These are all signs she's mentally looping on you. Women experience emotions with intensity, and when they focus on someone, that emotional energy becomes an undercurrent that shapes their interactions. Even if she seems distant, every subtle reaction is a reflection of how deeply she's invested in your presence, whether consciously or unconsciously. Another critical sign is how she protects her mental space while still circling back to you. She might appear indifferent, avoid certain topics, or hold back her feelings, but this is strategic. She's trying to maintain composure while her mind continues to play every interaction on repeat. She's imagining outcomes, recalling conversations, and analyzing your behavior. This internal dialogue is constant, and it's why she can appear both distant and intensely attentive at the same time. Men often misread this as inconsistency, when in reality it's a sign of deep mental preoccupation. And here's a truth few men understand. When a woman is thinking about you non-stop, she's also assessing your energy, your intent, and your potential. She's imagining your reactions, your desires, and how you might respond to different scenarios. Every laugh, every word, every gesture becomes a piece of data she stores for later. The obsessive thought process isn't casual, it's methodical, subconscious, and relentless. You're more present in her mind than she will ever admit, and that makes you central to her emotional and cognitive world. So, ask yourself, have you ever seen her reaction change subtly based on what you said or did hours, days, or even weeks ago? Did she bring it up in a way that felt almost natural, but perfectly timed? That's not coincidence. That's proof she's thinking about you non-stop, quietly looping your presence through her mind and letting it influence the way she interacts with the world around her. Recognize these signs, and you'll never underestimate the silent intensity of her thoughts again. She's mentally occupied with you far more than she's willing to show, and that knowledge changes everything. By now, you probably realize she's been thinking about you more than you ever imagined. But the truth is, what she feels silently is far more powerful than any words she could say. The intensity of her mental focus, the loops of curiosity and emotion running through her mind, they shape her behavior in subtle, almost invisible ways. And understanding this changes everything. Once you start seeing the patterns, the glances, the micro gestures, and the carefully measured words, you begin to recognize the silent obsession she's carrying for you. Here's the ultimate reality. She doesn't have to tell you she's thinking about you non-stop. Her actions, her energy, and her mental loops speak louder than any confession ever could. Every time she remembers a detail you barely noticed, every time she subtly mirrors your behavior, every time she reacts emotionally in a split second to something you say or Deut's proof, she's running scenarios in her head, replaying moments, imagining possibilities, and assessing the depth of her feelings. That mental preoccupation is powerful, persistent, and deeply human. You might wonder why she doesn't just show it. The answer is simple. Social conditioning, fear of vulnerability, and a desire to protect herself. Women are taught to appear composed, measured, and in control. So she buries her thoughts, hides the loops of obsession in her subconscious, and lets her mind do the heavy lifting. She's thinking about you non-stop, but she's doing it silently, efficiently, and strategically. That's why her attention can feel inconsistent, why she seems distant at times, yet drawn to you in ways you can't explain. And here's what separates men who understand this from those who don't: the ability to read the invisible signs. You start noticing patterns, timing, and emotional echoes. You pay attention to how she reacts to your presence, how she remembers details, and how her energy shifts around you. You see that even when she appears calm, her mind is looping on you. She's not indifferent, she's invested mentally, emotionally, and subtly, in ways that matter far more than surface-level gestures. Now, here's something I want you to do. Think carefully. Has there been a moment when you felt a subtle but undeniable connection? A glance, a gesture, or a phrase that felt charged, even when she said nothing overtly? That's your proof. That's the evidence that she's thinking about you nonstop, and it's powerful because it exists outside of words. Here's a personal equation for you, something only you can answer in the comments. How many moments have you noticed her subtly remembering or reacting to something you said that you thought she forgot? Type your answer below. And if this video gave you insight you needed, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share this with a friend who needs to hear the truth about female psychology and hidden attraction. Remember, her mind may be silent, but her thoughts about you are loud and relentless. Once you recognize it, nothing about her behavior will ever feel random again.